Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the Green Room today. My name is Jeff Russell. I have the pleasure of being the president and CEO of Delta Dental and hosting this webinar podcast. So one of the best ways that I have learned over time is through dialogues that happen at coffee shops and lunch places and breakfast places with folks in many different walks of life. And the Green Room was started to have in-depth yet these informal conversations with leaders across a variety of different areas, essentially to let you join us at the coffee table. So a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording today's event. So you can replay that if you'd like to, or if for some reason you're watching this on the replay. Thank you for joining us. Also, all of our participants are not on camera and they're muted, but we'd love to have your comments and your questions in the chat window. We'll be monitoring that throughout the process. So today's topic is agree to disagree, civility in the workforce. And my guest today is Scott Raecker from the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center at Drake University, which is the global home of character counts. So Scott is a longtime friend, and I can tell you that I have learned a lot about civility and other topics from him, often at breakfast at the Drake Diner, and even a couple of things about civility at the Hawkeye football tailgates where he serves his famous McRackers. So for the last 2 years, we've tried to curate topics that are important around leadership, around the workforce, also around benefits and the types of things that you're all dealing with out there in your everyday lives. And thank you for joining us for this next hour. There's lots of places you can find content for inspiration and learning. We are pleased that you chose to join us today. So we also want to take on topics that aren't easy. And I think civility is one of those topics, but we definitely want to dive in and tackle that today. So the concept of civility is obviously not new, nor is the concept of partisanship. Divisive politics have been around our country since its founding. For those of you who are fans of the musical Hamilton, what could be less civil than a duel amongst political leaders? My perspective is, though, that the rise of technology, particularly social media, has amplified this. It's given us all digital megaphones to say things publicly and loudly that we might have just said in private. Add to that the algorithms that sort of curate the news that reinforce our beliefs rather than bring us to things that we might expand our thinking. And it's easy to see how we can be divided. But coming out of this, I think, is the issue of civility. And as we'll explore, civility is really not just a political issue. It's not just about red and blue, but it spills over into our workplace, not only in terms of political topics, but in topics that we just deal with every day. So while we're coming up on an election with the myriad of political ads that I'm sure you're all seeing and hearing, our main focus today will be the workplace. And we don't live in a vacuum, so we will cover political pieces, but we're really taking a look at how does civility impact us collectively in what we do every single day. So let me introduce Scott Raecker. Scott has been the executive director of the Ray Center since its founding by former Governor Robert D. Ray as a lasting legacy to the Iowa sesquicentennial in 1997. Today, the Ray Center trains groups all over the world on the impact of character development and ethical leadership. Scott spent 14 years in the Iowa House of Representatives. We're also fortunate that Scott serves as the chair-elect of the Delta Dental of Iowa Foundation Board of Directors. So Scott, welcome. Many of our viewers probably know your work through the lens of character counts. Obviously, 8 million or so kids around the world have participated in that. But talk a little bit about the Ray Center and specifically around the work you do with adults.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And I really appreciate your invitation to be with you today. I love the Green Room concept, as I've loved our breakfasts and lunches over time. And I also want to thank all of your listeners for tuning in and listening. And I'm hopeful that just as our conversations, Jeff, are of value to you and me, I hope this conversation can be of value to the listeners. And I do want to also thank you for your leadership at Delta Dental and the community. I'm very proud of the work of Delta Dental. I'm tremendously honored to be on the foundation board and the great work that's going on there and will continue to go on of really shaping and helping to shape unmet needs in overall healthcare through oral health, vision, and the rest. So I just want to thank you for your leadership. As to your question, a little bit about the Robert D. and Billie Ray Center, let me start with Governor and Mrs. Ray, because I had the fortunate opportunity to work with Governor Ray for about 25 years. And what I'm finding more and more is that, this next generation of Iowans do not really know of Governor Ray. His years in office were 1969 to 1983. So a lot of younger leaders in our community aren't familiar with Governor and Mrs. Ray. So in brief synopsis, they are Des Moines residents, grew up here. They met at Roosevelt High School, graduated in 1946, where Governor Ray went off to serve in World War II, post-war Japan in the United States Army with really reparations and reconciliation there, which I think had a shaping element in his life. Mrs. Ray came to Drake University to get her teaching degree. Governor Ray came back and on the GI Bill came to Drake for business and law. He's the only person to ever serve as president of Drake University, both as a student and as an adult. He had three critical segments of his career pathway. The first was 14 years as a trial attorney. The second 14 years was as governor of the state of Iowa. And the last 14 in the work world were as chief executive of two major insurance organizations in Iowa. Throughout that entirety of that time, both he and Mrs. Ray were very engaged in philanthropic endeavors. Governor Ray really elevated himself from partisan politics. He'd been the former chair of the Republican Party of Iowa and elevated himself in his 14 years of service as a true statesman that went beyond the partisanship. Iowans knew that he had their back and would do what was right for him. He was a great leader, a great wisdom seeker, and a great deliberator of information and knowledge to make decisions. He's most notably known, Jeff, as the governor that stood up for the refugee relocations in the 1970s and 80s, first with the Thai Dam and then the boat people coming out of Southeast Asia. And in Iowa, for those that are familiar with that, we're very proud of that now, of what we've accomplished and what they've brought in the fabric of our state of who we are today. At the time, it was very unpopular. So this may come back later in our conversation about civility. And Governor Ray never lensed that issue as a political issue. It was a moral issue of saving people's lives that had no other choice. So that's really kind of a context of who he was as a person. And Mrs. Ray has also legendary impacts that she's had, like saving the Blank Park Zoo when it was going to be closed for the city of Des Moines, and now a model that the Botanical Garden used, really helping to raise funds and the restoration of what was the Hubble Mansion at Terrace Hill into the governor's mansion. So they both are tremendous leaders. So Mrs. Ray's still with us and just really shaped our work. And the reason I give you that as context of the Ray Center is that the work of the Ray Center perpetuates the legacy of Governor and Mrs. Ray's leadership style. They were focused on great character, on ethical leadership, and emanating from that is civility. Our work at the Ray Center mission is to improve civility through character development and ethical leadership. Governor Ray's premise, which I fully agree with and I've seen happen in life, in workplaces, political, and education, is that if we get our character competencies and our ethical leadership operating at optimum levels, that one of the outcomes of that is a heightened level of civility. So our mission is, again, improve civility through character development and ethical leadership. We started with one fifth grade classroom using the Character Counts platform. And as you'd mentioned, we've now grown. We serve the world, over 8 million youth with Character Counts. It's premised on the 6 pillars of character. Core values are important to any discussion of civility. Now, the 6 pillars of character are trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. And they are I and action. What can I, Scott Raecker, do today to act in a capacity worthy of trust? And I give you that also as foundational. If core values are related to civility, the I in action reflection is also important. Governor Ray's vision with our work was that we would always serve youth as the predominant legacy of what we're doing, because they are our future, but that we would have other tracks of business, if you will. So we work also, many people are familiar with our Character Counts work, I'll acknowledge that. I think fewer people are familiar with the work that we do in the workplace, where we provide resources, assessment, training, custom-built consultation to help bring mission, vision, and values to life. We work in the public arena very heavily at the municipal level here, where we've been involved with several very difficult conversations with community leaders to try and affect change. Jeff, you were involved with one of those as a leader that we were involved with. Working with different municipalities on strategic planning and visioning, or regional entities such as DART or Metro Waste Authority. But we also work with state legislative leaders from all 50 states, US territories, Canada, and Mexico. We've done that for over a decade in bringing them resources and tools to create a culture of excellence, civility in their adult level public service and governance. And this has become more and more difficult. So what is the Ray Center? It's the embodiment of a better society. As we talk about what the academic institution has to provide, at Drake, the inspiration statement is to transform lives and strengthen communities. At the Ray Center, we've been doing that for 25 years. I'm very proud to be a part of Drake University. Every day I get up motivated that if we do our work right and well, there will be lives transformed and communities will be strengthened with a basis around ethical leadership character leading to heightened civility.
Thanks so much for that. And obviously the work of Governor Mrs. Ray carries on in your work and the legacy there. So let's, for the folks here, let's just start with the basics. How would you define civility? Because I think it has a lot of connotations to it.
So I think this is a really important starting point because like any word or concept, people have their own definitions of that. We tend to default in the concept of civility of niceness, kindness, etiquette, manners, even in the public service arena, decorum. Think in a workplace, what are all the written and unwritten rules of how we're going to work well together? That's civility, but that's the floor of civility, and we go much deeper than that. Civility is how do you have the hard conversations? Civility, as your title indicated, how do we agree to disagree? Or flip that around, how do we disagree without being disagreeable? How do we look at topics and issues in the workplace? You're put on a team environment and there might be personalities that don't mix well together. How do we get people on the same page for the common goal and the common good? The same is true in the public service arena as well. So what we talk about with civility is how do we get to the depth of having the hard conversations? How do we actually become intentional and proactive to seek out those that are new and different with different ideas so that we can be better informed, help those individuals be better informed, and try to seek the best possible result or the greatest outcome that you could have. And I really think that we do ourselves a disservice if we stay at the niceness. And I love Iowa Nice. I'm all about that. But it's got to be how do we get deeper, or else we just get sorted into like-minded groups that we just do the things we do and we aren't open to a betterment of society and the world.
So let's start with the political world. We're obviously in an election campaign, and those things get heated. Given the implications that have happened, what do you think the results or the impact on us as citizens is of this idea of a red and blue divide? I mean, how do you think about that when you're working with legislators, when you're working with other folks about, how is the political environment today, and then maybe also what can we do to continue to improve it?
Yeah, it's such a complex issue, and there's so many facets that we could dive into with this. And what we're experiencing right now, of course, is the campaign cycle, the campaign season, people trying to stake out who they are and what they want to do and drawing contrasts with their opponents. And there's a lot of questions around civility with that. And we can get really deep. At the same time, we can also talk about that from, I think, two lenses. And I'd use one for those that are listening that have children or have had children in the middle or high school age group. When you see flyers coming into your home or ads on your TV, is that something, if your child was running for a student council or student senate at the high school or the middle school, that would be acceptable language to be using for them? So I do think there's a context around one of the issues and concerns we have right now is that we're laying out in front of people, as we have continually, history of our country and beyond. I mean, the 1800s elections were some of the most horrific with language that we had. They just didn't have Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and all these means of getting them out, let alone TV. But we've got to consider what's the context of the long-term implications we have of showing that the modeling of, hey, the way that we disagree with people is that we tear them down, demean them, or misrepresent them. That's a problem.
Yeah, I think that, from my perspective, I think one of the things that, we led with is, the idea that this idea of, kind of harsh language in the political sector is new, is not accurate. To your point, I mean, the elections of the 1800s, I mean, the musical Hamilton, all those sorts of things were vile in many ways. We certainly have amplification of this, but I think at some level, you end up having this modeling effect too. Yep. At some level, if I see the national leaders do that, and then I see the Senate and the House do that, then that comes down into state politics and now my sense is you've started to see this. Maybe this is an impact of COVID. Maybe this is just an impact of where we have been, moving down into the municipal and school sectors. in that sense. What are you seeing in that, and how do you think that has an implication on, again, us as citizens?
So we've got an emerging national issue around municipal and school board elections and governance, and that is the introduction of and intentional advocacy through partisan elections, where both Democratic and Republican parties are getting involved. And this is not just in Iowa, this is nationally in school board and municipal elections. I think tied into this, another complexity is civic education of what is the difference between nonpartisan municipal and school board offices and what are partisan offices at the county level and at the state and onto the federal level. And it has an impact on governance. And we're very pleased right now, and I'll send out a link of some information I mentioned here, but on December 7th, we will be hosting the first ever National Summit on Civility for Municipal Government on December 7th with the National League of Cities. There's just nobody in this space talking about these things. And it runs the gamut from what you're talking about and brought up is the partisanship and how that's affecting governance, as well as the disruptive nature that we've seen, in many places around municipal governance as a place to get voice and stakeholder. And we need to be attuned to that and how we work with that so that everybody's voice is heard.
So we'll move to the workplace in a second, but as we were preparing for this and even just chatting before we came on, there are some positive things though, and it's not just all negative. You mentioned one with the summit that's coming up. What other things are you seeing in your work around the country and around the world in terms of positive nature of this political discourse and civility?
Well, we're very fortunate as we work with state legislative leaders all across the country and including the territories, Canada and Mexico. There's a lot of really good, well-intentioned people that are working hard to run and serve. And when elected, they want to do what's right and work to govern. The media does not cover the 90+% of things that happen at a state legislative level that are very positive, very productive, very bipartisan, of people that care deeply about their state and care deeply about each other, quite candidly, across party lines. What we see in the amplification is, the 10% that's really out there that really does divide people, and that's fostered by the media as well. So I'm actually encouraged with the number of people I see that are well-intentioned and wanting to dig deep to resolve our really, really tough challenges. And they are out there, and that's a whole nother list, right? But mental health reform, as an example, does not know partisan boundaries. It just doesn't know that. And there's, for every state, there's 100 different ways that you can get about mental health reformation. And there's a lot of people working hard to do that. But that issue has elevated, especially coming through COVID now, at a much higher level. So these are real and challenging issues that we're being faced with. And my concern is that we're going to be dumbed down by just what we see on Facebook or Twitter or the news. And being able to discern, Jeff, what's the difference between news and entertainment as it comes to these issues? So I'm encouraged by the number of people that are out there that are really working right and hard and want to improve things. And I think we need to be building bridges with people on both ends of a continuum or spectrum that have really strong opinions about other perspectives of governance. And how do we make sure that we're listening to people and acting upon the issues that are important to them?
Yeah, I think that, and as we get into the workplace, I think there's a difference between identifying a problem and then what's my lens of how we might solve it and what's your lens of how we might solve it, as opposed to just we can never agree on what the problem is. And I think there's a lot of those issues around, in our political world. So in a couple of weeks, we're going to have an election. And then hopefully it will be over. Hopefully we'll have some results relatively quickly after that. And then we've got sort of what's next. And I think let's kind of move this into the workplace, because I think what we've seen, at least I have, is that it maybe spills into the workplace is the wrong piece, but it certainly impacts that. And maybe I'll just start with this is, as you're working with employers and other folks, do you see the world more charged? I mean, is this a more charged environment than we've seen before in the workplace in terms of civility, in terms of these issues, or maybe am I just more cognizant of it than I've been in the past?
I think we're more aware of it than we have been in the past. We spent quite a few years being isolated and maybe assessing and reflecting on things differently, and especially as it relates to the workplace. So I think there's some of that. Again, the question that I ask, and not to diminish your question, I think it might be amplified, but I think the real question is, can we be better than we are? One of the things I hear a lot is, oh, it's never been worse than this. I can't talk to my neighbor about these issues. It's never been worse. But as you pointed out, right, Aaron Burr, Vice President Burr, challenges Hamilton duel, and over a political rivalry, shoots and kills him. Hamilton's dead. Burr's career is over. 1856, we had Preston and Brooks, Sumner's and Brooks in the U.S. Senate anti-slavery speech. Representative was so incensed by that, came to the Senate floor with a blunt tip cane and caned the senator almost to death. And they were both reelected resoundingly in their own area. So it's not worse than it ever has been. But I have to believe even at those times, there were people like yourself with whatever forum was, and maybe Boston at the tavern over a lager saying, we got to be better than this. And I think that's where we are. I think there are people saying we've got to be better than this. I think there's more anxiety around workplaces of, what can we talk about or not talk about? What's the water cooler talk? And, it's interesting because, you think of all of the different things. It's not all politics, right? You got people that think, it could be over football rivalries. It could be within anybody's individual football team. It could be over how do we address diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. That's a pretty sensitive topic for me. And I don't disagree with it, but what do you want me to do better or differently? These are all issues across the spectrum that drive where we historically have had and spent the majority of our relationship time. When you think about spending 8 hours in a workplace environment with other people, a lot of people, that's a lot more time than they spend with people even in their own family at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? So I think we're amplified, and I think people aren't really sure what we can and can't talk about, because I do think there's a large number of people out there that don't want to offend other people. But that also means then that we're not having tough conversations we may need to have.
So that's a great segue. So let's talk about that. You talked, as you started to define civility, about this idea of Iowa nice or Midwest nice, and that's different in that sense. In the workplace, we have to have hard conversations, right? We disagree, and it's not necessarily that we all agree on the outcome potentially, what we want for our customer, for our business, for our employees. Pick what topic it is. We might disagree how. So, what are some tools that you've been able to introduce into companies? I mean, you've worked with Delta Dental at the Ray Center as well, but in terms of how to have hard conversations, but how to have them in a civil way and not being disagreeable.
So the first thing, and it's going to sound so rude to so many people, but I think it's more important now than ever, and that's the intentionality around relationship building that needs to take place in the business environment, both internally and externally. It's our ability to get to know people. And you can do that in fairly short bursts of time, but to go from surface to substance, it's the reality that COVID has exacerbated that, because now we're having a great opportunity to have these kind of conversations where multiple people can listen in. But when you're trying to resolve a tough issue at work, it's tough to do on a Zoom screen. First of all, the intentionality of building relationships in the workspace is critically important. Again, Governor Ray analogy, and I'm going to make this from the business of governance, not politics, right? When Governor Ray was governor, leading the largest number of employees in the state at the time. He's running a major organization. It just happens to be called state government, and his board of directors, if you will, is the legislature, who has a different role than a board, but similar. My point is, Governor had a ping pong table in the basement of the Capitol, and he played ping pong with every legislator every year, and he did it to get to know them. He used it as stress relief for himself, which is also important, and his staff. But when they played ping pong, it was the rules of ping pong and one other set of rules. You could not talk about state budget, state policy, executive department. You could just talk about your family, your friends, your relationships, your interests, your hobbies. And through that, Governor Ray got to know legislators, so that when they had to have hard conversations and difficulty, they already knew they had some common bonds, some common elements. So that same strategy is important in the workplace. Where are you creating spaces, especially as you break down larger organizations into smaller teams, that your smaller teams actually have opportunity to build relationship, so that when it comes to the hard conversations, we can act on core values like assuming the best intentions of others, right? Somebody's not doing this to give me a dig or a jab. They have the same outcome in mind. So the starting point, Jeff, is relationship building, the intentionality of relationship building. And again, it's like the 6 pillars. It's I and action orientation. What am I, Scott Raecker, doing to help build relationships in my own office and the leadership that I have of the 12 people on my team? And I would challenge you the same with what you're doing with your leaders and people in the organization. A good example, I would tell you this, I know this, and I know that, I think I've asked him if I could, I know I've had, because I've shared it publicly. I see Dan Houston every once in a while, and I really admire Dan's leadership. That's a massive organization, right? But Dan still takes the time to meet with people that are fairly new, early to mid-level in the organization, just to see how things are going, just to have a conversation with them, to understand them, find out what football teams they like too, right? But my point is that here's the chairman and CEO of a very large organization that's taken time to build relationships. It's no different than Randy Edeker spending time at the checkout when the person's checking them out, that's a 17-year-old high school student in their first week at Hy-Vee, and taking the time to get to know that person in a very short period of time to start to build relationship. So I think that's really critical, is the intentionality of relationship building.
One of the things that, we're all in this kind of, in-person, hybrid, remote, movement, depending on the type of business you're in. I have an opportunity every year to meet with our employees in smaller groups to kind of, talk about things that are important to me going into the year, but also to listen to them. And the big conversation in 2022 was obviously like, how are things going from a hybrid perspective as we entered the year? And the number one thing that they said is, we love the flexibility of a hybrid, model, but we miss the relationships, we miss the connections. And so, we've tried to be intentional about bringing our teams in for what we call one team days, even if it's just, to be able to say, go have lunch, let's bring in lunch, and we're going to put you with somebody you might not have met before. We've had obviously a lot of folks that have come into the organization throughout the pandemic, and I think that's important. To that point, when you were talking about Governor Ray and the ping pong table, it made me think about, one of the things, again, kind of going back to politics, but I think it has a huge implication on business, is when our elected leaders quit living in Washington, D.C. with their families, they had no ability to build relationships, across the aisle with families at the soccer game and the baseball game and the picnic. Makes it a lot easier to vilify somebody when you don't know their family, you're not going to see them in that world. I think that's true in our business world of, you can have a tough conversation if I've already built up sort of the goodwill. I've made deposits into the bank of goodwill, having built relationships. And now if I might have to draw against that because we have an issue that we have to deal with, now it's not, it's not about, you're attacking me as a person. We're talking about an issue. So I think those are important points.
The second piece that I think is critical. So if we start with the foundation of relationship building, it brings the human condition into this. The second element in the workplace, and I would gather that every person, to a person that's listening to this, in their workplace organization has some form of core values identified. We work with the 6 pillars here. Every organization we work with corporately has some sense of those values. And what you tend to find with people that work, and I think this is a leadership issue too, is we're hiring for culture. By the time that we just have as a floor, anybody we're going to hire is going to have the credentials and the ability to do the job we need to have done. But we're actually also looking for those competencies, those character competencies from, we call them performance character, or our best work, things like work ethic and dedication and overcoming obstacles, and moral character, our relationship building of, forgiveness, grace, integrity, trustworthiness, those types of things. We're actually hiring and using in our hiring process to get to the articulation. My point is, if anybody were interviewing for one of the positions we would open up here or have come open, by the time I'm talking to them about our touchstone and our core values and what our data says about the culture of our culture assessments that we're doing here, so that I can get a sense and feel confident that the person that we're going to bring onto our team is a culture add, not just somebody that's not going to deflect the culture. But that comes from an understanding and a knowledge point of your core values. Because for all the leaders that are listening to this, you have employees, and if it's not that they can recite, these are our core values, right? Respect, integrity, teamwork, and excellence. There's a major organization here in the community that's there for. Those are great words. But what employees want to know is, that's great. I don't disagree with those things. What do you want me to do better or differently? Mm-hmm. So the the reality is it's not just that we have core values, but that you've got intentionality organizationally about what the core values look like in action. Because it's civility, agreeing to disagree, disagreeing without being disagreeable, is rooted in your core values. People have to understand what the core values look like in action. And I can give you a lot of examples if we want to go down that path, even with my own self and our Drake core values that we utilize. But you have to identify what are the habits that you want to see people do, and you've got to communicate those, and you've got to have accountability around those. And that's all fueled by the mindset of why is that important?
Well, I think, more than probably ever in my career, people are talking about this idea of culture and intentionality. It's not just, posting the core values up on the wall and, and then doing something different. I mean, companies have a culture, whether it's the one they intend to have or one that they've, created through other behaviors is different. I think your point is well taken. Let's just go into that a little bit. So, you lead the Ray Center. You talked about Dan Houston. It's one thing to do that as, what we might consider the leader, as the titled CEO or whatever. How do you see people doing that within their work teams, in their areas of influence, within the workplace? Somebody who's on this, that's not the CEO, not the senior vice president. How do they impact this conversation about culture and civility?
Well, this is why it is so important. You've just defined why it's so important. Because the new hire at Principal or Delta Dental or Hy-Vee is not going to be trained by Dan Houston, Jeff Russell, or Randy Edeker, right? In fact, we do a lot of work with Hy-Vee as well. The 17-year-old that's been hired to be a checker and bring in the carts is going to be trained by the 18-year-old, right? And they're going to say, well, what's really important here? And that's the same in your workplace, anybody listening to this, and it's tied into those core values. So you have to create that culture of what the expectational outcomes are. We use a process, a research-based process that you can adapt. Any performance or behavior can be modified or changed when four things are happening together in concert. And anything that you want to see done better or differently. And the first is, what habits do you want to see done better or differently? Give me something or concrete you want me to do, and I'm able to do that. Why is that important? How are we going to be held accountable? And then what's the communication? We call this a CHAMP tool. Communications, habits, accountability, and mindset lead to performance. I'll put that in the follow-up that will be sent out. And I'll give you one working example of this. 17-year-old at Hy-Vee, and this was shared to me by Jeremy Gosch, who's now president of Hy-Vee, was a store director at one point, and a person had been trained on the process, and they were bringing in the carts. And Jeremy looked out the window, and he saw this person bringing in, as he shared, like 15 carts at one time. And Jeremy had happened as store director to tell this person no more than 5 carts. And so came in, said to this young person, we've talked about this, only 5 carts. And he responded to Jeremy about dedication, about doing all the right things well. I mean, all of the other core values that are part of Hy-Vee's fundamental values, right? It was really a go-getter. But Jeremy failed to explain to the person of the why. The mindset was that when you have more than 5 carts and you have to turn them, they slide. And when they slide, they flatten the wheels, and then we have to pay for wheels to be re-welded on the carts so they don't have that flow. My point is, you can't just say the habit, bring in 5 carts at a time. You've got to give the mindset of why to do that. And I love that analogy because every workplace has those things. We should challenge ourselves if there's a better way to do things. But that analogy of you need to communicate clearly. One more on this, and then you can have a follow, unless you want to interrupt here.
It's all good. Keep going.
Worked with somebody at one point, and they identified this as that they'd hired this exceptionally right person for the position. And in fact, a long history of knowing and working with that person before, but when that person entered their organization, they did not have the work ethic that the other people had on the team. Smaller organization, very visible. And the leader was like, they will see the rest of us and it will get better. And it didn't. And that element was, they didn't articulate, what does it mean to have good work ethic in an organization? Like, show up to meetings on time, prepared, and put your pieces on the agenda before we get there so that we know what we would have, right? Why is that important? Well, for the evolution and the knowledge base of our company. How are we going to hold ourselves accountable to that? What's the communication, the clarity of communication to you? And if that person had used these tools, I think they could have identified the things that would have been able to have helped that person be able to stay in that organization that they did not stay in. And I give you that as an example of me, myself, and I, when I was a much younger leader and not a very good manager, and I didn't address it well. And now that I have tools and strategies that we use ourselves here, that we work with others, is how do we clearly communicate? So this third element, beyond relationships first, then you have to put the core values in action, and there's depth to that we can stick with you on. Then you've got to have clarity of communication. The communication is critical.
Well, I think, one thing that comes to mind as you were talking about that is this idea of, reinforcing what I guess I would call the fundamentals of that culture, right? I'm reminded of the famous basketball coach, John Wooden, won however many, national titles at UCLA in the 60s and 70s. And every year, the very first day of practice, he would have them go through, how do you put your socks on so you don't get blisters? And, they had just come off winning a national championship. They have all these really high caliber people. And they always started with, the very first thing we're going to do is put our socks on so that we don't get blisters. Why do we do that? Because if you get blisters, you might not play at your optimum, and we won't be able to do that. And I think that, it's just it's a reminder to me of a story that says, how do we make sure that we continue to think about the fundamentals of all of those things, the behaviors that we want? And you make a great point about the why. Then, why is it that you have 5 cards versus 15 cards? So,
and what we tend to do in onboarding new people, Jeff, is we tend to focus on the fundamentals of task. You've got to learn this process. You got to learn this software. You got to do this. It's a fundamentals of task is where the focus is. And we don't spend the same amount of time on the fundamentals of the core values. They're in the employee handbook. I signed it. I got it. I see them on the wall when I walk in. But when you start to dissect your fundamentals of core values in a way, so like at Drake, we've got joyful accountability, generosity of spirit, all in this together, and commitment to mission. And when those came out through a series of listening posts President Martin had done, and been a group of Drake people that had put this together and evolved these, every member of my team was like, those are great. That's wonderful. Those are good words. What do you want me to do better or differently? So we actually unpack that with that chapter. So what does a habit look like of generosity of spirit, which is kind of a misnomer of language, but the way it drills down at Drake is, I bring my best self to work every day. I am bringing my best. I am assuming the best intentions of others. Those are 2 core fundamentals for us, that if I do that, that's demonstrating some joyful accountability. So action oriented. So for me, and people, I'm sure I know several of the names I saw that were on this know me, I'm a fairly intense person. I'm a fairly focused person. I don't know anyone that has more joy, fulfillment, hope in their job, in their role. I love what I do. You would not necessarily look at my face at 7:30 at a Rotary meeting and think, wow, that Scott Raecker is so full of joy. And it's not because I'm not joy-filled, it's that I'm very focused. So for me, one of the things that I needed to do as you break this down individually, I need to smile. I need to show my team members when I'm walking in that door, just by my facial expressions, that I love what I do. And you think, well, that's Scott, I just spent an hour on this call and about civility, and you're telling me that you have to smile more. Okay, think of it for yourself. I in action. What can you do in your own team that brings core values to life and shows them? Because those core values done right and well enhance a level of civility. So, and again, I'll come back to the one, Jeff, about the definition as we bring in joyful accountability and generosity of spirit, assuming the best intentions of others. Like something didn't go well, I didn't get the data I needed for this report to pass up the chain or whatever. It's not because somebody intentionally did that, right? That expectation that we're all in this together, that has actionables. So like when you've got people out on maternity leave, you've got people that are dealing with health issues with family members. We're in this together to help each other. So it's not from a point of resentment, I got to do extra work. It's like, they've got my back too. So that core value intentionality is critical.
So one thing I'll just jump in here before I want to drill down on the best intention, believe the best intentions, but we are monitoring the chat. If you have a question that you'd like us to address, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to that. But I want to drill into this. I think, as I thought about this topic, and we've done work with you, one of our values is one team. This idea around collaboration. Another is around leadership at all levels. And a subcomponent of that is this concept of ownership. What does ownership mean at Delta Dental? And as we drill down through the CHAMP tool and thought about that, one of those things is believe the best intentions. Your point, if somebody didn't send you a report, it wasn't because they were meaningfully keeping you out of some loop. We're all busy. We're all doing things. At some level, and tell me what you think about this. If there had to be just one thing we all thought about in terms of the realm of civility, we keep coming back to believe the best intentions. I believe that you and I are in relationship, and therefore you didn't do that to harm me. It just was and to use your words, you were just out of integrity for a little bit. You're going to get back into integrity. How is it that that happens? Do you think the believe the best intentions is the most important thing, or is there something else you'd point to?
That's a really good question I hadn't thought of. I think it is one of the most important things that enhances civility, and especially on disagreeable terms, right? You think processes should be done this way to generate this, and I think processes should be done this way to still generate that, and they're different processes. We're not both going to prevail in that. So how do we find that out? It's not because, we don't, here's the other thing about best intentions, Jeff. You can't let ego get in the way. You can't let being right get in the way of doing right. And sometimes those are parallel paths of, that's Jeff's idea, not my idea. I want my idea to prevail. I do think the best intentions is a fulcrum of civility, of assuming the best in others. And I want to take that into the point about communications is what's the mindset around our communications? Because this mirrors both politically and in the workplace. Are we in dialogue because I'm trying to change your mind on this, Jeff? Or are we in dialogue because I want to understand your perspective? Mm-hmm. And here's the learning point I've had. I can't even begin to change your mind about something in the workplace, of a process, procedure, outcome, whatever, unless I know why you think the way you do about that. So I think the most important thing of assuming the best intention, we both want the best for Delta Dental. We both want the best for the Ray Center. Okay, we can agree to that. Now we've got something we disagree on here. As we do that, I need to understand why you feel the way you do about this. And I'll give you one, I use this as an example that maybe somebody might remember this. We talk about this in our trainings and use it in the workplaces. We're going to put all of the people in the room on one side of a very hot topic social issue, and I will be on the other side of that. And I am so convinced that my opinion is right, I will stand against all of the rest of you in this room. And this is a social topic that people have gone to their death for, all right? So here's the topic, and your job is to persuade me I'm wrong. I am a flat earther. The earth is flat. All the rest of you, I will put on the side of being round earthers. And I know you, Jeff, and I know the people you work with, they are analysts, they're scientists, they're researchers. You're going to come with data, you're going to come with photos, you're going to have firsthand testimonials, and you are so convinced that the earth is round, you're so excited about that you are just going to unload all of that on me to change my mind. But there's one thing you don't have that you must have to change my mind. And that is you have to ask the question, Scott, why do you think the earth is flat? And it could be, well, that's the way the maps are flat, or that's because an NBA basketball player said it was flat and I respect him a lot. But until you know why I think it's flat, now insert round earth and flat earth for any other disagreeable issue. If you can't find out and understand first why that person has a belief other than you with good intentions, you'll never be able to find that collaboration and common ground. And that's just my take on it. I just think those are critical elements of, Covey-esque, seek to understand and be understood. You don't acquiesce being understood. But we do a lot better time listening actively to people than always listening for response.
Well, I think, we saw that certainly during the pandemic. I mean, all of the issues that came up, masks versus no masks, vaccines versus no vaccines, people had, strongly held beliefs on both sides of that. My notice in that is sometimes we spend more time talking at people than with people, and I'll go back to an example. You mentioned one when you were, a leader earlier in your career. I love to debate. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love the give and take of that. It's enjoyable to me. And earlier in my career, what was pointed out to me is that I would just take the knees out of somebody's idea. like right away. Like, it's like, that's a terrible idea. I mean, I wouldn't say this right, but essentially I'd be like, that's a terrible idea. I can't even imagine why you would think that. And this executive coach challenged me to say, before you can say something is a bad idea, you have to be able to offer 5 ways that you think it could be better. And it was a game, right? It was to the idea of what can I do to change this behavior? And that moves you from a level of skepticism to a level of curiosity, right? It's not all of a sudden like, well, that's a terrible idea, Scott. I can't even imagine why you think that way. To the idea of, okay, if I believe Scott and I both have the best interests of our organization, that why would he bring that to bear? And then how might I build on top of that to be able to do that? And I found that, I think, in this conversation that, then essentially, rather than being on opposite sides of the table, how do you get on the same side of the table working to that, to get to a better outcome?
Well, and from a leadership role, Jeff, I would tell you of the great leaders I've been privileged and admired to work with and to know, and I would put you in that category. Governor Ray, I worked with for over 25 years, and I don't believe there was ever a time in the 25 years that he told me to do something. He was a great question asker, and I am sure there were times that he knew things that he wanted to get done, but he allowed those to happen by asking me questions and guiding dialogue and conversation. And I think there's something in there. I've seen this with you in board meetings. You ask the probing question, what would it look like if, right? And so, we do the same thing. So like one of our challenges right now, we want to get our early childhood curricular resource in every early childhood center and kindergarten classroom in Iowa, because we know the impact it's making. Great. That's a big lift. That's a big challenge. There's a lot of different ways to do that. We don't get that by just saying this is the way it's going to be done. We have to challenge ourselves and ask the question. So I think there's another thing that I would impart to this conversation and those that are listening from a leadership lens. If you're wanting to create that culture of civility and that ability to disagree without being disagreeable in your organization around really important business topics, you have to be in tune to creating a level of leadership of reflective question asking. Not the ones that take people out at their knees, but the reflection questions of what can we do better or different. We use the term here a lot, praise and polish. Our challenge is we spend about this much time on praise and about that much time on polish all the time. And I think I could do a better job of helping on the praise side, but you have to do that in organizations, and that's part of active listening.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So you mentioned this, I think, in the open, but I'd like to dive into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion and those conversations in our workplace. So to some extent, based on the very nature of the subject matter, they can be at best delicate, at worst divisive in terms of beliefs that enter in that. Talk about some of the best practices that you've seen about how to create that environment where people can talk about those things and be able to think about those, because they're really important issues in our world and in our workplace, and be able to do that in a way that is respectful, but can also bring in differences that people might have.
Well, I think one of the challenges for all of us as we address this, whether that be in our homes, in our workplaces, in our communities, is just how we started this conversation, Jeff. You actually have to start by making sure we understand the definition of the words of what we're talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they mean different things to different people. And I'll give you just a visual example of this that's evolved over just the last several years. Fairness deals with equity, fairness and justice. Equity. And there's multiple theories that play into that. It could be effort, competence, need, seniority, merit, all of those things that play out in the workplace. And you may have seen, or your listeners may have seen that slide that's got the 3 kids looking over the fence at the baseball game. And the one's a tall kid and can see over the fence, and the 2 next to her are shorter and they can't look over the fence. And when there's 3 boxes, you give each of the 3 kids a box. That's equality. And now the first one and the second one can see over, but the third one's still too short to see over. And then equity, as it was used at that time, was you gave the shortest child 2 boxes, the middle one 1 box, and everybody could see over the fence. And then that terminology several years ago, that was equity, until the third child was not the shortest, but in a wheelchair. And now that needed to be a ramp to go up, right? So that changed a bit. And now there's actually a slide out there that's got a 4th panel where in certain circumstances, the barrier of the fence has to be removed for it to truly be equitable. So this is a very deep area, and we have to define what it is we're looking at. I think that's the first piece. Again, similar to what we've talked about before, I think it's a reflective nature. What do I need to do better or differently to do this organizationally and understand it? I'll use our own organization. We've got a phenomenal National Advisory Council that used to be our independent nonprofit board of directors. We had our board matrix that looked at geography and diversity, and so that we made sure we were representative in who we are and what we did. But that's not enough anymore. We need to be going deeper and asking ourselves hard questions. If I may, I will suggest a best practice is the Iowa Council of Foundations has some excellent work out there. I was privileged to be on a cohort with two of the Delta Dental colleagues looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to impact of our Delta Dental of Iowa Foundation Board. And I'll give you one example of this. When you really drill down deeply, and it says, Delta Dental of Iowa, since its inception of the Foundation of Doing Good, has been working to serve underserved populations. And in doing that, we've developed, now that we've grown, great processes and a lot of paperwork around that. And with diversity, equity, inclusion, we're actually trying to help support grant seekers that might not have a grant writer with them, and they may have the best project, but they might not have the best grant writer. So how do we utilize the opportunity for oral inventory of understanding what people's needs are, as well as just the written word? That was a new piece for me in the equity and inclusion space that I actually think, and I give your staff great commendations of bringing into our work to help us be better, because we're not relying on the processes that we're most familiar with only, which is a lengthy written word about articulating a need, and rather talking to people like, why would they not cross the street to go over and get the vaccine at that location across the street when that's just not how it was done? We got to meet people where they are. So I may have rambled too much on that. My point is that we need to go deeper than just throw out those words and think that it's a matter of are people that look different than us involved in our conversations and our work. We have to go deeper to understand some of the systemic implications of that.
Well, I think as we bring that back to this idea about how to have this discourse, as this has become a more important part in corporate life and in our work here, not only on our foundation but in the insurance company, one of our guiding principles around that is that this is a safe space. That we will all make a mistake at some point in time, and not intentionally, believe the best intentions, right? We might all say something that potentially is offensive to somebody else. Okay, so now how do we drill into that and understand that point of view? But that if we really want to make this work better, we have to live in a safe space. And people have to be willing to say things and maybe not say them perfectly the very first time. And I think that is true in lots of these things, right? I mean, there are folks, I put myself in this category that, maybe you too, that kind of like to talk, right? We could do this all day. And there are other people that don't, and that's not the way they do that. And we think about that. So how do we create that space to allow people to articulate what they want to articulate, to be understood in a way that they need to be understood? I think your point on the grants was a great one, but I think it rings true in our workplace too.
Yeah, I would see that. I think we've become better at that in our own workplace. And I think that we have to have a raised awareness right now. And here's the bottom line. It's the right, and go back to Governor Ray and the refugee relocation, right? It wasn't popular at the time. And for some people, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't popular, but it's the right thing to do. And so we're gonna have those conversations, and let's do them in a positive, productive way that advances us to a better community. Why is that important beyond the right thing to do just for the course of human history? It's important because we live in a state that's got 3 million people and had 3 million people in 1900 and didn't have a Delta Dental then with X number of employees that's trying to hire more. We just don't have enough people in this state to fill the needs that we have. And we've got to be a state that people look to and say, this is a state I want to go to. This is a state I'd like to live in. And I would tell you, this is a civility issue. I think if we could create the culture in this state, that in this state, you ran for school board, city council, state legislature, statewide office, and we ran positive, proactive, and productive campaigns. We didn't tear down, demean, or disseminate bad information about other people. We would have people flock to this state because I believe people are hungry for that. I think people are hungry. And at the same time, we live in a world where there are people that like the enemy. Governor Ray said there's a big difference between your opponent and your enemy. And quite candidly, there shouldn't be a workplace represented on anybody listening to this where people in the workplace use somebody else as an enemy, because they're not. They're on the same team, on the same field, even if they don't know what goal they may be going after. So this differentiation, I think, of identifying, look, we're in this together, but we don't have enough people in Iowa, and we have to be a place that welcomes all people. And this is a challenge for us as a state. And I think the platform of diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions, the 4 Equity Task Force is coming out with some playbooks and recommendations that should be very good. Kyle Kraus has been very involved with Tanner Kraus, excuse me. Tanner has been very involved with the development of these with Marta Codina and Renee Hardman. I think there's positive movement on this, but look, the reality is from a business side, we need more people in this state. Really, that is one of the reasons why if you need a pragmatic reason why beyond the humanity side, we need more people. And we've built ourselves largely in the last 100 years off of new immigrants to the state.
Yeah. So we are coming up on the top of the hour. Like I said, we could probably go on, and I would enjoy that very much. I've enjoyed this. I'll give you the last question or the last thought, and you can multiple choice, pick the one you want. A closing thought about why civility in the workplace matters. You might have just covered that. Or on every game day Saturday for Iowa football, you post a Niall Kinnick quote online as part of your deal. The floor is yours to talk about Niall Kinnick and his impact to civility and character as well. Take whichever one you'd like.
Well, the most important thing in the workplace, I hope you can take away from this, is to build relationships, communicate clearly, and help define what it is you want to go after, even those difficult conversations, which ties into exactly why I love the Kinnick quotes. I find Niall Kinnick to be a thought leader, not only of his time, but over ages and eras. He was a brilliant writer. People really don't write like he did at the time. And as you will know, as you pay attention to those, many of those quotes have nothing to do about football, right, or they're about the lessons learned from football that adapt to the regular society. He talks a lot about the emergence of what's happening in Europe in the pre-World War II integration from the United States. He talks a lot about segregation and desegregation of his experience of traveling to the South. He speaks a common language to people that makes you think. And that's why I put those up. I love Niall Kinnick. I love Jack Trice. I love Johnny Bright. I think they all have something in their life stories which were richly impacted negatively for all of us to take as lessons and viewpoints. And the challenge to all of us, Jeff, you, me, and everybody else listening, is, are we living lives worthy of that? Are we living lives that someone, we might not have been Heisman Trophy winners or die for our team, but are we living, even if it's in our own family, that people will reflect back on our legacy, as we do with Governor Ray, and say what I said openly: we do our work right and well, we will perpetuate the legacy of Governor and Mrs. Ray. And I hope to have some small part that when I'm no longer involved with this, that I've had some legacy building. And I think it's that interaction and reflection. What can I, Scott Raecker, do to be better today around these issues?
Well, I can tell you that you have built an incredible legacy, 8 million kids with character counts, all the work you're doing with state legislatures, not only in the United States, but with folks across the world. You have continued that legacy and built that on your own. So thanks so much. We will leave it at that. For those of you who have joined us, thank you so much for spending your time with us. Like I said, we were talking about it, probably hundreds of thousands of these types of opportunities through podcasts and learning to do that. And we are thankful that you were willing to spend an hour with us and inspiration and learning. You'll get some information after the fact with some of the things that Scott talked about. We'll have a link to the recording if you want to share it with friends and colleagues. Always, we appreciate your feedback through the survey. And if you have topics you think we should cover in the green room, we'd love to have those as well. So have a fantastic week, a fantastic rest of the year. We probably won't get one of these in until 2023. And we appreciate your time today. Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.